In the previous videos of this series, we explored additional information concerning the operation of the Great Pyramid water pump. We examined how water was delivered to the Giza Plateau and how water was made available to the pond surrounding the Great Pyramid. We also examined in greater detail how water was moved from the pond up into the upper end of the descending passage using an artificial duct acting like a siphon. Also, the method of filling that siphon was discussed, as well as how the Great Pyramid was started and stopped. In this video, we will examine how water exited the Great Pyramid water pump. This video will also explore what the water was used for. We will discuss how the purpose of the pumped water justified building such a massive and expensive construction project. The use of the pumped water provided the return on investment that justified building the enormous construction project modern mankind calls the Great Pyramid. As discussed in previous videos of this series, water was pumped up through the King's Chamber vents, but the exact design and condition of the upper ends of the King's Chamber vents is under scholarly debate. This is because the direct physical evidence indicating how these two vents terminated at their upper ends is now missing. Some say the upper ends of the King's Chamber vents were blocked off by the casing stones that are now gone. Others contend that the vents continued up through the casing stones so that these vents could, for some reason, point to stars. There is no remaining physical evidence to indicate the original condition of the upper ends of these two vents because the casing stones that were located at the upper ends of the King's Chamber vents are now missing. Oftentimes, researchers, archaeologists, historians, and Egyptologists will infer that something was a certain way based on some other related evidence. If we use that method, we can infer that the upper ends of the King's Chamber vents were blocked off because the upper ends of the Queen's Chamber vents were blocked off. Or we can guess in another way and contend that the King's Chamber vents actually extended through the casing stones for some esoteric, obscure, mysterious, or symbolic purpose. But there is another option. We contend that the upper ends of the King's Chamber vents connected to similar passages that led down through the casing stones and down towards the base of the Great Pyramid. These small passages, similar to the vents, would have been embedded into the casing stones. The casing stones were bonded together watertight, therefore the passages in the casing stones would have also been watertight. In the time of Herodotus, one of these watertight conduits or artificial ducts from the upper ends of the King's Chamber vents leading down towards the base of the Great Pyramid could have been damaged and partially exposed so that it was observable when Herodotus saw the Great Pyramid. Maybe it was one of these artificial ducts used as the output of the Great Pyramid water pump that Herodotus saw and wrote about so long ago. Water exited the Great Pyramid water pump through the upper ends of the King's Chamber vents. There is scholarly debate as to the original design of the upper ends of the King's Chamber vents. Some say that the vents were blocked off at the upper ends and did not exit the Great Pyramid. Others contend that these vents went through the casing stones so that they could, for some reason, point to stars. There is another option. We contend the casing stones incorporated a small vent-like passage that allowed the pumped water to travel down to the base of the Great Pyramid. This vent-like passage in the casing stones is shown in cross-section. Water would move from the King's Chamber up through the King's Chamber vents and then down towards the base of the Great Pyramid. This is how water exited the Great Pyramid water pump. Then, at the base of the Great Pyramid, there was a watertight passage that allowed water to leave the small vent-like passage in the casing stones. This horizontal passage allowed water to be transported from the Great Pyramid to where the water was used. We will remove the water from the pond and view this horizontal passage in cross-section. Water traveled down through the vent-like passage in the casing stones and then moved through this horizontal passage leading away from the Great Pyramid. The horizontal passage allowed pumped water to be transported to where the water was used. Certainly, the pumped water was used for irrigation year-round and also to irrigate agricultural land that was higher in elevation than the yearly inundation. This horizontal passage was located above the paving stones, yet it was below the surface of the water in the pond. This passage was made from fine-cut stones bonded together watertight. The water was moved through this vent-like horizontal passage from the base of the Great Pyramid water pump to higher elevation in the Giza area. Although the pumped water had many uses, this was how water was delivered to farmland, providing year-round irrigation. The original builders were geniuses who built a massive pyramid-shaped prosperity machine which provided wealth, abundance, and leisure for those who built it and for their children. Because almost all of the casing stones have been removed, the exact location of the casing stone passage is under scholarly debate. It may have traveled down the middle of the Great Pyramid side or even at an angle if that fit the needs of the original builders. Although the passage was incorporated inside the casing stones, the blue line is added for clarity. Of course, there are people who say that no water could be delivered to the Great Pyramid, so it could not have been a water pump at all. This gives people an easy and simplistic way to reject this direction of research. When I hear people say there was no water for the Great Pyramid to pump, I think of all the various cutting-edge researchers who have discovered many water-related features, including a harbor near the base of the Great Pyramid. People who reject this research because they think no water was available for the Great Pyramid water pump are blissfully unaware of recent water-related discoveries associated with the Giza Plateau. It is not just myself, but other prominent contemporary Great Pyramid researchers and authors who contend water was available at the Great Pyramid and was delivered to the upper end of the descending passage. But some would ask, why would they need to pump water at all? They have all the water they needed in the Nile and the yearly flood. Certainly there is water in the Nile River, but is that water of any use? Let me explain. I live in an area with many farms. Every farm has a water pump used to pump water from the nearby river. Just for fun, I asked a local farmer, why do you need a water pump? You already have all the water you need in the river. He said the water in the river is worthless for irrigation. He told me the river water is only beneficial when it is pumped out of the river and pumped onto the farmland. That is why he went to the expense of buying and using a water pump on his farm. I like farmers. They live in the real world and have to face and solve real-world challenges every day. I wish more people who studied the Great Pyramid had this type of practical common sense. Some people approach the concept of the Great Pyramid being a water pump with this mindset. If they think that the use of the pumped water is valid, then the Great Pyramid was a pump. If they do not think that the use of the pumped water is valid, then they contend the Great Pyramid is not a water pump and the research is invalid. To me, that is a strange way of looking at things. If the Great Pyramid is not a water pump, why even consider how water that was not pumped was used? If the Great Pyramid is a water pump, then agreeing with or disagreeing with how the water was used has no bearing on if the Great Pyramid was a water pump or not. Here is an example to illustrate what I am talking about. What if there was another worldwide catastrophe? Advanced civilizations ended. Even the courses of rivers changed, and hydroelectric dams were left with no water near them. These dams were gutted through the centuries removing anything of value to make fishing lures or jewelry. Long after the catastrophe, a new civilization arises, developing its own unique power systems, unlike the civilization before it. A historian discovers an electric razor in an archaeological dig. The historian theorizes that the electric razor was somehow powered by the dusty, massive structure built in the dry canyon. He would be laughed at and ridiculed by his colleagues, who would say that these huge abandoned structures we know of as hydroelectric dams would not be needed to shave someone's face. So the question is, would people ever need a big water pump in the valley of the Nile? Actually, the largest structure in the valley of the Nile is used to pump water, and it is pumping water right now. In the real world, in the valley of the Nile, modern people built a massive building much larger than the Great Pyramid. One of the purposes of this building, which is the largest structure in the valley of the Nile, is to be the pivotal component of a huge irrigation system. Although canals are used in Egypt, the High Aswan Dam is used to power municipal pumping stations and agricultural water pumps that move water from the Nile River along canals and through sprinkler systems used to irrigate the crops. The High Aswan Dam is used to pump water. The High Aswan Dam was designed and built to be a prosperity machine for the people who built it. Also, in the valley of the Nile, there is an ongoing, unprecedented infrastructure development known as the Tushka Project. This ambitious engineering project includes the massive Mubarak pumping station with an estimated cost nearing $1.5 billion. This pumping station, built in modern times, will be the largest pumping station of its type in the world, and its purpose is to provide prosperity for the civilization that built it. In ancient times, the Great Pyramid was also built to provide prosperity for the civilization that built it. These are the things I think about when people say there has never been a need for a water pump in the valley of the Nile. Others say shadoofs work and were used in ancient times, so they did not need a big structure to pump water. Shadoofs still work, but in the real world, no engineer has ever chosen to use shadoofs for massive industrially scaled infrastructure projects in ancient or modern times. If shadoofs are that good, why don't they use them instead of constructing the expensive Mubarak pumping station? Real engineers know the answer. It is for these reasons I find it odd that people say there is no need for a massive structure in the valley of the Nile built to be used as a water pumping system. So in modern times, in the valley of the Nile, there is a need for a massive pumping station. In ancient times, in the valley of the Nile, there was a need for a massive pumping station. Both water pump systems provided prosperity for the people who built it. The Great Pyramid was a water pump. But what was the pumped water used for? One of the uses of the pumped water was irrigation. Yes, there was a yearly inundation that flooded the land before the construction of the High Aswan Dam. Yet, a one-time flood is not adequate for the highest yield for farmland in an arid climate. The Great Pyramid water pump provided water for irrigation year-round instead of relying on the yearly inundation. The Great Pyramid water pump also moved water higher than the yearly inundation, increasing the available irrigated farmland. The use of the pumped water for irrigation of farmland and other agricultural uses would have justified the construction of this massive infrastructure project. But there were many other uses of the water pumped by the Great Pyramid water pump. Certainly, the Great Pyramid exhibits high technology, and the uses of the pumped water would have been a part of this high technology. In the beginning of the modern industrial revolution, water power was a pivotal power source. This was also true in regards to the Great Pyramid. The pumped water probably was used to power large machinery, which would have been used for any number of purposes. The generation of electricity would be a good example. Also, the production of large quantities of compressed air is another proposed use of the pumped water. This would have been accomplished using a trompe similar to the Ragged Chutes hydraulic air compressor located in Canada. This method for creating compressed air does not require a motor or a rotating shaft or fossil fuel. There are a number of so-called boat pits and other very large excavations near the Great Pyramid that could have held the machinery and devices powered by the pumped water. The compressed air could have been used in conjunction with a vortex tube to create two air streams, one very hot, the other very cold. These hot and cold zones would have applications in scientific experiments and other uses. The compressed air could have been used to create high voltage static electricity, which has a number of industrial and scientific applications. There are a number of scientific purposes and even medical uses associated with the many applications of the pumped water. I see the Great Pyramid as the centerpiece of a research center and scientific facility at the Giza Plateau. The uses of the pumped water in ancient times would have been endless. The ancient geniuses probably used the water pumped by the Great Pyramid water pump in ways that we can't even imagine. Probably the most exotic use of the pumped water was proposed by Albert Zock. In the second quarter of 1993, the magazine called Borderlands published Mr. Zock's article, which proposed that the Great Pyramid and the water it pumped were used to alter the weather in Egypt. In this article, Zock contends water would cascade down the faces that have the upper openings for the king's chamber vents. This would cause these faces to be relatively cool, while the other two faces would be quite warm. The result of these differing temperatures would be the creation of a vortex or whirlpool. This vortex would be located at the Great Pyramid and reach up to the sky. According to Zock, in his fascinating article, water in the enclosure pond would be drawn up into the sky. This added water into the atmosphere would alter the weather by increasing the rainfall in the region. I mention this possibility for the proposed use of the pumped water to whet the imagination of inquisitive minds concerning how water may have been used on the Giza Plateau by the Great Pyramid water pump. According to Zock's article, it was proposed that the Great Pyramid water pump was used as a weather-altering machine. The king's chamber vents would have exited through the casing stones. On the exterior of the Great Pyramid, there would have been a trough located where the king's chamber vents exited. The purpose of these two troughs was to receive the water exiting the pump. When the water pump was operating, water would have cascaded down the two faces with the troughs. This would have caused these faces to be cool, while the other two faces would be quite warm. This difference in temperature would have caused a whirlpool to form above the Great Pyramid. This whirlpool, or mini tornado, would have drawn water up from the enclosure pond up into the atmosphere. This water vapor in the atmosphere would have altered the weather in the area, increasing rain for agricultural purposes. The opposite sides with no water are warmed by the sun, and the other two sides are cooled with the water, causing a whirlpool to form. This explanation provides yet another proposed purpose for the water pumped in the Great Pyramid water pump. The uses of the pumped water in ancient times is very interesting. Yet, what is important is the uses of the pumped water utilizing the ancient high technology of the Great Pyramid in modern times. Although the Great Pyramid was built in ancient times, it is a wonder of high technology. This unique water pumping system is both efficient and non-polluting. The uses of this water pumping technology in modern times would primarily fall into two broad applications. The first application would be agricultural, irrigation, and industrial use. Both farms and factories need to pump a lot of water. Using the technology of the Great Pyramid water pump, the high cost of pumping water would be greatly reduced. This would reduce the cost of irrigation and allow marginal farmland to be economically viable. The second application would be the use of the pumped water to generate electricity. Using an inexpensive water pumping system would reduce the world's consumption of fossil fuels and reduce the need for electricity generated by nuclear power plants and hydroelectric dams. It is the goal of our nonprofit foundation to redevelop this ancient but highly advanced water pumping technology to help our modern but very troubled world. This technology would help decentralize the generation of electricity and reduce pollution associated with the generation of electricity. This ancient but highly advanced water pumping technology can be used as an alternative power source. This ancient water pumping technology is scalable and adaptable. There is no need to have a big stone pyramid in people's backyards. Modern components like polypropylene enclosures and PVC pipe can be used to build pumps using this ancient technology. These types of water pumps will be built using modern materials and off-the-shelf components like enclosures and valves, while local craftsmen in cottage industry settings will do the custom fabrication to create the water pump that meets their local needs. Both the lower water pump and the upper pump are different than any type of water pump used in modern times. The lower pump is not a hydraulic ram water pump because there is no drain to waste 80 to 90% of the water traveling through the water pump. This is why you virtually never see a hydraulic ram water pump because they are tremendously inefficient in their use of the precious resource of water. Instead of being a primitive ram pump, the lower pump utilizes the powerful force of implosion to pump water. Implosion was well understood by the mid-20th century inventor Victor Schauberger, who built many devices using this fascinating property of water. The upper pump uses water as fuel. Maybe it is better said that the upper pump, housed in the Great Pyramid structure, uses the components of water as fuel. After the electrolysis process, the combined gases of hydrogen and oxygen are ignited, creating a powerful vacuum. This vacuum lifts a massive water piston in the Grand Gallery, which is then allowed to move back down. The downward movement of the water in the Grand Gallery compresses air in the Queen's chamber. The pumping process continues until water moves up through the King's chamber vents. How interesting it is that there is a modern water pump which incorporated the burning of fuel in an enclosed chamber to create a vacuum to move a liquid piston as part of the water pumping process. This water pump is the huge, industrially scaled Humphrey pump located in Australia. The Humphrey pump does not operate exactly like the Great Pyramid's upper pump, but they have some uncanny similarities. Also, the upper pump is somewhat similar to a type of engine referred to as an internal combustion fluidine engine. This type of engine is a fascinating study, but yet again, there are some similarities as well as striking differences between the upper pump and internal combustion fluidine engines. As we close this video series, I want to give honor and praise to the ancient geniuses who went to the effort and expense to build their masterpiece of engineering, now called the Great Pyramid. We contend that their effort was rewarded with a huge return on investment. What the geniuses did was create infrastructure in the form of a massive pyramid that was a functioning machine used to pump water. This machine provided tangible prosperity for the builders and their civilization. There was nothing about the Great Pyramid which is religious or symbolic. There was nothing about this massive machine that was intended to point to something or to make some worthless correlation without causation that would never help anyone. To do something like that would be a very small return on investment. Instead, the builders of the Great Pyramid water pump enjoyed a huge return on investment for the cost of building the Great Pyramid water pump. The Great Pyramid water pump transformed the desert into a garden. It transformed toil into leisure. It transformed poverty into wealth. It transformed hunger into full bellies. The Great Pyramid water pump was designed and built to be a massive prosperity machine. The challenge of our generation is to understand how and why our distant ancestors who were geniuses built the Great Pyramid and redevelop this ancient high technology in our age to provide real, tangible prosperity in modern times for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren. Thank you for watching the entire video series. I appreciate that. We covered a lot of material, some of which was not explored to the depth I would have liked. But those subjects touched upon in this video series are explored in much greater depth in my 2 books in our first video series. My first book is titled Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid, and it is about how the Great Pyramid was assembled using water locks and barges. The book is available in softcover or Kindle ebook format. Our first DVD documentary is titled How the Great Pyramid Was Built Using Water Locks and Barges. Our first DVD documentary is a companion piece to my first book. The assembly process is so visual that both the book and our first documentary provide an extensive understanding on how the Great Pyramid was built. Our first documentary is available from Amazon.com in DVD format and streaming video. My second book is titled The Great Pyramid Prosperity Machine, and it is about how the Great Pyramid operated as a water pump. This book is also available from Amazon.com in softcover or Kindle ebook format. This video series you are watching now is from our second documentary titled The Great Pyramid Water Pump. It is a companion piece to my second book. This documentary is available in both DVD format and streaming video. Right after the conclusion of this video series, we have included a short video showing the book trailers for both of my books and some other information. It was wonderful to be part of this video series, and it took a lot of help from many people. The animations were the best quality we could provide with the resources we had. The animations were intended to be as simple as possible to convey the concepts involved in the water pumping process. Although there is scholarly debate as to the exact configuration of some of the valves and other features, the animations were intended, as best we could, to give an explanation of the functional purpose of the features found inside the Great Pyramid water pump. Now that you have watched the entire video series, all we can ask is that you ponder the ideas and explanations we have provided for the same direct physical evidence that everyone has. We suggest that you watch both documentaries and read both books to get a full understanding of this direction of research on how the Great Pyramid was assembled and why it was assembled. You can help us by telling your friends and associates about our research and books. Please like us on Facebook and mention us on other social media. Please visit our website at www.thepump.org for more information concerning what our nonprofit organization is about and how you can become involved. Please contact us through our website if you have any questions or if you wanted to be a participant in the research and activities of our foundation. It is our hope that we have brought glory and admiration to the geniuses who built the Great Pyramid water pump. It is our hope that we can honor our distant ancient relatives by understanding what they did and to embrace their efficient, clean, environmentally friendly, high technology for our modern but very troubled world. Again, thank you for watching this documentary about how the Great Pyramid water pump was built to be a prosperity machine.